In this lesson, you're going to learn how to make all those wonderful ideas you came up with real. Make them tangible so you can get real feedback from your teammates as well as for the people for whom you're designing. Let me start with a story of Grace. Grace is a woman I worked with who was frustrated because she had this idea for a community blog, but just couldn't get any traction with it. She was telling different people about it and they nodded their heads. They seemed kind of interested, but she needed some resources from her manager to actually build it. So that night she went home and she made a wireframe, that is a physical mock-up of what the website would look like, what the community blog would look like. And she brought it in the next day and she showed her manager. As soon as she showed her manager that physical demonstration of her idea, he gave her the resources she needed to make happen. So prototypes are a very powerful mechanism for making your ideas tangible and making the progress you need to do. Formally, we just define prototyping as the process of quickly and cheaply making ideas tangible to answer specific questions and getting feedback from others. Here's a prototype I was shown the other day by a teammate. I love it. Can you guess what it is? It's the temperature gauge for a shower. Can you see what they made it out of? A paper plate, a paper cup, some tape, and a tongue depressor. They made this in about 2 minutes. They were able to quickly communicate their idea that they were working on for a safe temperature gauge for a shower so kids didn't get burned when they got in the shower. They could have talked about this, but they quickly made the prototype, showed it to a few kids, and got some feedback on the idea. I'm going to share with you a few simple rules for prototyping that will help you make more effective prototypes that communicate your idea and get your ideas and your questions answered more easily. The first rule of prototyping is to build quickly. Here's one of my favorite prototypes. This was made by a colleague of mine who was redesigning the drive-through experience for a shop. At first, he started at real scale, trying to design a big car and a big storefront. Then I suggested to him, what if you made this at model scale so you could think through the interactions without wasting all the time? Well, he made this, as you can tell, in just an hour or so. And then he was able to show potential customers, as well as his colleagues, the idea that he had. When he wanted to change the configuration, all he had to do is pick up a piece and move it, rather than build an entirely new set. So he saved a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort in making this very low fidelity prototype. The second rule for prototyping is to make many. Here are 3 storyboards that a designer created for a recommendation system. So he wanted to think through what are the 3 different kinds of interactions that one could have. The reason he made 3 to test with users was because by making 3, he was not committed to any one of them, and he was able to get more feedback because he showed 3 rather than just showing 1. The second rule of prototyping is make many. This is my friend Mert, who is making the handheld medical device. He made multiple prototypes, as you can see on the table. He was trying to figure out in this particular test, what's the exact shape should it be? Should it be round? Should it be square? Edges? How should it be formed? And by making all of these, he was able to show these to the nurses and doctors with whom he was working and get feedback about which particular attributes they liked of each one. The third rule of prototyping is to provide only essential details. This is a lovely prototype made out of tinfoil and construction paper. Can you guess what this is? This is a ticket purchasing device for the train. They didn't need to do the whole interface. They just needed to do this one part that said, your ticket, because they were trying to understand if they moved this position of this interface to a place where everybody could reach, would it make it easier to use? They made this prototype in about 20 minutes and were able to test it with users an hour later. They hadn't spent hours and days in the lab building this up. They just took a short amount of time, got feedback on this, and then based on that feedback, were able to revise it and show it to another user a couple hours later. There's 4 forms of prototyping that we're going to talk about in this lesson. The first one is storyboards, role plays, walkthroughs, and touch points. I'll give you illustrations of each one so you can better understand. The first one is role play. Role play is when you enact the experience in real time with all the different participants to see what it might look like. In this picture, a team is working on a new interactive museum exhibit to understand What's the interaction of the child? That's played by the woman in white. What's the action of the parent? That's played by the man in blue. And then the man with the button-down shirt in the light blue is the exhibit itself. Here's another great role play example that I love. In this picture, what you'll see is there is a man playing the doctor and then a kid. What were they trying to understand in this? They were trying to understand, what does it look like to make doctor's appointments more kid-friendly? What I love about this role play is that they reenacted the exam room experience, using really simple materials. So they didn't have access to a medical room, but instead what they did was they converted an office space into a medical exam room. If you look on the wall, with whiteboard, they created the different instruments that a doctor might use. The table in front of the child is just a piece of cardboard. And then the computer screen behind the person playing the doctor is just a piece of cardboard. So they were able to enact and see what it would be like to create more children-friendly visits with the doctor by doing this. The result of this prototype was to actually come up with an activity that allowed the doctor and the child to connect more. They had a coloring book that they both shared together. Here's the behind-the-scenes picture of that medical room that I was describing to you. As you'll see, it's just an office building that they've converted into a medical space. They moved the furniture around and drew some pictures on the wall to make it feel like a real medical space and enact what that would look like. By doing so, they were able to elicit the emotions and the behaviors of the child and the patient that they needed to understand to develop this idea. Here's another prototype of what we call a walkthrough. So walkthroughs allow people to go through the exact experience they would, as if it was real. This screen, created on a piece of cardboard and Post-it notes, allow people to navigate the hospital system. They didn't do any programming to make this, but they were able to get a lot of feedback on the kinds of choices people wanted to make and what they expected to see on such a screen when they entered the hospital. Here's another great prototype that I love, also considered a walkthrough. It's the walkthrough of a digital experience. Now you may be asking yourself, where are the computer screens? Where's the handheld? In this project, they realized the most important thing to understand was what was it like when people first came to the welcome page of the website. And so what they've prototyped in this picture is the welcome experience. So their goal was to make the welcome experience feel like you were walking into somebody's home. On the ground, you'll see a green sheet of paper. That's the welcome mat. So what would it be like to design a website where it was as welcoming as if you were walking into somebody's home and they were offering you a choice of options of things to eat when you came into their home? They did this walkthrough to understand what are the sequences of events and what kind of expectations do people have, and how could they use this analogy to inform the design of their ultimate digital experience. Here's an example of a touch point. It's basically a piece of cardboard with a tongue depressor on it. This team was designing a game that allowed kids to choose a different character and then enact that character. It was called Hats. So they made this touch point to see, could the kids, this was a 5-year-old in this case, spin the dial, see the picture, and understand that that was the character that they were being given. As I mentioned earlier, prototypes are meant to answer questions. So when you go in, you want to be asking, what question do I have to answer? Questions you might ask with each prototype, and each one might be a different question, might be, is it useful? Did I create something? Is my prototype something that people would actually want to use? Is it desirable? Perhaps you create something that works, but nobody wants to use it. Is it easy to use? Is it functional? Why or why not? Is it sustainable? Again, by sustainable, we mean both, is it good for the environment, and are people willing to pay money for it? And then, because you're going in with many different ideas to test, you're going to ask, how does this one compare with the alternatives? One thing I want you to remember with prototypes is they develop over time. Just like ideas, they may start off as a rough sketch, move into a more looks like and perhaps works like prototype, and by the end actually have a functioning prototype. This is an example from my friend Hannah. She was working on a robotic bear for kids with diabetes. She had this idea several years ago, and at the time she drew a picture of it. You'll see that. Then she started to actually make it out of stuffed animal material. So she actually did some sewing and she had a stuffed animal. It wasn't functional yet. The robotics weren't inside of it, but it was a teddy bear that kids could hold. And now, several years later, she has this all integrated into one teddy bear that she sells on the market and has started her own company doing this. She has the bear and the robotics, and it's integrated in one. But it didn't all start off like that. It did just start off as a rough sketch. In this lesson, you've learned how to take those ideas, make them tangible and real, so that you can test them with other people. By testing them with other people, you'll gain much insight into how the ideas work, what works, what doesn't work, and what you need to improve upon.